Did you know that despite sharing over 1,200 kilometers of border, a person from Lisbon is often genetically closer to someone in Ireland or Western France than to someone in Barcelona? It sounds like a geographical error. They share the same peninsula, a similar climate, and a history of Roman and Moorish rule. But the DNA tells a story that the maps don't. While Spain is a complex mosaic of Mediterranean, continental, and Basque influences, Portugal has evolved as a genetic island for nearly 1,000 years. This isn't just about culture or language. It's about ancient Ice Age refugees, the unique kingdom of the Suebi, and a 900-year-old border that acted as a biological filter. Today, we are cracking the code. Why are the Portuguese and Spanish so different under the skin? To understand the divergence, we have to look at the two front doors of the Iberian Peninsula. Spain is the Mediterranean gate. For millennia, its eastern and southern coasts were the landing pads for Greeks, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and Romans. This created a rich, diverse genetic landscape, but one that leaned heavily toward the east. Portugal, however, is the Atlantic fortress. During the last glacial maximum 20,000 years ago, the western edge of Iberia was a sanctuary for hunter-gatherers. As the world warmed, these pioneers moved north along the coast. This created what scientists call the Atlantic facade. While central and eastern Spain saw constant inland migrations from Europe, the western edge remained a stronghold for these ancient Atlantic lineages. This is why even today, the haplogroup subclades in Portugal often mirror those found in the British Isles, and Brittany more than those found in the Italian peninsula. Portugal didn't just grow out of the land, it grew out of the sea. Now we must be careful not to view Spain as a single genetic block. Spain is a fascinating mosaic. The Basque people in the north, for instance, are one of the most unique genetic groups in the world, carrying a signature that predates the arrival of Indo-European farmers. The Catalans in the east share deep ties with southern France, and Galicians in the northwest are in many ways the genetic cousins of the Portuguese. However, when we compare the average Portuguese genome to the average Spanish genome, we see a clear westward shift. While Spain absorbed the migrations of the continental interior and the Mediterranean, Portugal's genetic history was being written in maritime isolation. After the fall of Rome in the 5th century, Germanic tribes flooded into the Iberian Peninsula, reshaping its demographic landscape forever. Most people have heard of the Visigoths, who eventually ruled almost all of Iberia and established their capital in Toledo. But in the northwest, modern-day, northern Portugal and Galicia, a different, smaller, and often overlooked tribe settled, the Suebi. The Suebi were originally from the regions around modern-day Germany and Central Europe. Unlike the Visigoths, who were constantly on the move and engaged in power struggles across the peninsula, the Suebi established something remarkable: the Kingdom of the Suebi, one of the first stable sub-Roman kingdoms in Western Europe. Their capital was Braga Augusta, modern-day Braga, in northern Portugal. For over 170 years, from approximately 409 to 585 AD, this kingdom maintained a distinct identity separate from the Visigothic south, and this separation matters genetically. While the Visigoths eventually assimilated broadly across the peninsula, the Sui left a concentrated genetic footprint in the northwest. Northern Portugal holds a clear Scandinavian signal. Markers like I1 and R1BU106 aren't just data points. They are the genetic signature of those who arrived, settled, and remained. It is one of the key reasons why the northern Portuguese genetic profile remains so different from the broader Spanish profile. The Suebi didn't just pass through, they became part of the foundation. One of the most surprising and often misunderstood findings in modern Iberian genetics is the legacy of the Moors. Both Portugal and Spain were ruled by Islamic caliphates for centuries. The Moors arrived in 711 AD and controlled large parts of the peninsula for over 700 years in some regions. But here's the paradox that surprises many people. North African genetic markers are often higher in Portugal than in many parts of Spain, including areas like Andalusia that were under Moorish rule for much longer, sometimes until 1492. Why would this be the case? The answer lies not in how long the Moors stayed, but in what happened when they left. The nature of the Reconquista, the Christian reconquest, was fundamentally different in the two countries. In Spain, as Christian kingdoms like Castile and Aragon took back territory, They often expelled or displaced local populations entirely, especially during the final stages of the Reconquista in Granada in 1492. The Spanish Inquisition further intensified this process, forcing conversions and expulsions of Muslims and Jews throughout the 15th and 16th centuries. In Portugal, however, the process was more gradual and involved significantly more integration, as the Portuguese crown moved southward from its base in the north. Instead of total replacement, there was substantial mixing between the local Ibero-Roman populations and the established North African and Moorish communities. This is especially visible in southern Portugal, specifically in regions like the Alentejo and the Algarve, where North African haplogroups like EM81 can reach frequencies of 10 to 15% in some local populations. This created a unique Western Mediterranean genetic signature that is quite different from the genetic landscape of eastern Spain, where the replacement was more complete. The Moors didn't just rule Portugal, they became part of its genetic fabric. Scientists compared DNA passed down from both parents, from the father's line and from the mother's line. When they do this, the differences between Portuguese and Spanish populations become statistically clear. First, primary ancestry. Portoclastas, as Atlantic Iberian. This means Portuguese people show a stronger genetic connection to populations along the Atlantic coast. Places like Ireland, Brittany, and Western France. Spain, on the other hand, is Mediterranean Iberian with deeper ties to southern France, Italy, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Second, North African influence. Here's where it gets interesting. Portugal generally shows higher levels of North African ancestry, between 5% and 12% depending on the region, with the highest percentages in the south. In Spain, this number is more variable and often lower except in specific areas like Andalusia. Third, Germanic markers. Portugal has a concentrated Suebi Northern European signature in the north. Haplogroups like I1 and R1BU106 appear at around 5 to 8% in northern Portugal. Spain, by contrast, has a broader but more diluted Visigothic influence spread across the entire peninsula. Fourth, Mediterranean input. Spain received significantly more East Mediterranean DNA from ancient Greek colonies, Phoenician settlements, and Byzantine traders, especially along the eastern and southern coasts. Portugal, sitting on the Atlantic edge, received far less of this influence. And fifth, Celtic roots. Both nations share Celtic ancestry, but Portugal, especially in the north and center, shows a direct continuity with ancient pre-Roman populations, like the Lusitanians and Galicians. This creates a genetic bridge to the ancient Atlantic world that is much less pronounced in Mediterranean Spain. These aren't small differences. When you plot Portuguese and Spanish individuals on a genetic map of Europe, they cluster into distinct groups, even though they share a border. Today, Portugal's genetic diversity reflects the many layers of migration and settlement that shaped its history. Northern Portugal, particularly regions like Minho, show strong influences from Celtic and Germanic populations. People in these areas tend to have lighter skin, blue or green eyes, and blonde or light brown hair, traits linked to Northern European ancestry. Rural northern regions tend to have more genetic continuity with these ancient groups, whereas urban centers in the north have experienced more recent genetic input. In central Portugal, such as in the Baias and Douro Valley, the genetic profile is more balanced with influences from Celtic, Roman, and Moorish populations. Genetic studies show that people in central Portugal have a wide range of physical traits, from light skin and eyes in the north to darker Mediterranean features further south. Central Portugal serves as a transition zone where diverse influences have mixed over millennia.